So John Sullivan, the former Deputy Secretary of State and ambassador to Russia under both Trump and Biden, has a very realistic view of Russia, boiled down into 4 critical points that I want to expand upon as advice to the Trump administration, were any of them to be one of my 167,000 followers. I doubt it, but you never know. So the first critical point is that Russia sees itself as a direct enemy of the United States and the West, not just a competitor. And it doesn't matter if Trump is in charge, Biden is in charge, Obama, Harris, doesn't matter. The Kremlin will adjust itself to try and defeat whoever is leading the US and the collective West. This belief shapes Russia's entire approach to its foreign policy. Unlike typical rivalries where nations compete but still look for areas of mutual interest, think China and the US for instance, Russia views itself in a state of ongoing war or conflict with the West. The Kremlin believes that the United States and NATO are actively working to undermine Russian power and sovereignty. Putin uses this narrative to frame the West as a threat to Russia's very survival, which justifies his aggressive actions at home and abroad. This mindset affects how Russia interacts with Western nations. Rather than approaching diplomacy as a way to find common ground, the Kremlin sees it as another front in its conflict with the West. Every engagement is treated as a contest to be won, reinforcing the idea that the U.S. and its allies cannot be trusted. As a result, efforts by the West to negotiate in good faith or show goodwill are often met with suspicion or just flat out exploited by Moscow. Russia's confrontational stance is evident in its foreign policy tactics, such as election interference, disinformation campaigns, and backing anti-Western groups. I mean, they've even invaded other countries, clearly. They will even go to such petty lengths as banning the people that maintain systems at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow so things like the water heater won't work just to get the small wins. And this happens in the present. This isn't like old KGB Soviet-era stuff. Now, the Kremlin aims to weaken Western alliances by sowing division and instability, making it harder for the West to respond effectively to Russian aggression. This approach also extends to the treatment of American citizens in Russia, like the wrongful detention of journalist Evan Gershkovich, which signals Russia's willingness to push back against Western pressure and bolster its narrative of a besieged Russia, that they're surrounded and we are going to destroy them, which is patently ridiculous. The second key point is that the Kremlin operates with a total disregard for the truth, making it an unreliable partner in any negotiations. Deception and dishonesty are the core strategies of the Russian leadership. The Kremlin frequently lies about its intentions, as seen in the lead up to the invasion of Ukraine, when officials repeatedly denied any plans to attack right up until even hours before the assault began. They denied invading Crimea in the face of overwhelming evidence and eventually owned up to it. This pattern of deceit is not accidental but deliberate, aimed at misleading opponents and gaining a tactical advantage. This level of dishonesty creates a significant barrier to diplomacy. The idea of trust but verify, which was a Reagan-era proverb and guided U.S. relations with the Soviet Union, no longer applies. With Russia's repeated and blatant falsehoods, there's no trust to begin with, only a need for constant verification on every little detail. The Kremlin's approach reduces diplomacy to a game of manipulation where agreements and treaties are easily broken and statements cannot be taken at face value. Russia's strategy of lying extends beyond diplomacy into its broader foreign policy, where disinformation campaigns are used to shape narratives and confuse the international community. The Kremlin views truth as a tool to be bent or ignored to serve its goals. John Sullivan said the Kremlin's attitude is that the truth is just the story which succeeds. This makes meaningful negotiations nearly impossible, as Russia's word cannot be trusted, leading to a breakdown in any potential for genuine dialogue, compromise, or agreement. In essence, Russia's willingness to lie and manipulate is a fundamental obstacle to resolving conflicts. The West must recognize that dealing with the Kremlin requires constant skepticism and a focus on verifying every claim, and there is no expectation of good faith in Russia's diplomatic engagements. Now, the third key point is that Russia's goal in Ukraine goes beyond temporary gains or negotiating leverage. It's about complete control. The Kremlin's objective is to fully subjugate Ukraine and bring it back under Russia's influence, seeing Ukraine as a part of its rightful sphere of dominance. For Russia, this is not just a conflict, but a crucial step in reasserting its power over former Soviet territories and preventing Western influence from spreading further east. This explains why any talk from Russia about negotiations or peace should be viewed as disinformation. Such offers by Putin and his ilk are typically aimed at dividing Western support or buying time for the Russian military rather than representing a genuine desire for compromise. The Kremlin's endgame remains unchanged. It wants to dominate Ukraine entirely and ensure it cannot align itself with the West. So there is no off-ramp here that I keep hearing about. There's no off-ramp for Putin in this conflict, and he's not looking for a way out. His strategy is focused on achieving victory on his terms, even if it means continuing a prolonged and costly war. The West must understand that Russia will not back down or settle for less than its core objective of controlling Ukraine, making any hopes for a negotiated peace unrealistic without a decisive change in the conflict's dynamics. And by conflict's dynamics, I mean Russia starts to lose badly. The Russians may pause, but they aren't going to stop. Now, the fourth and final point is that any meaningful change in Russia must come from within. External attempts at regime change are neither realistic nor wise. While the current Russian government's aggressive actions are troubling, history shows that trying to force political shifts from the outside often backfires. Such efforts can strengthen the Kremlin's narrative of foreign interference, rallying domestic support for the existing regime. The responsibility for changing Russia's leadership or political direction lies within the Russian people. External pressures or calls for regime change can be counterproductive, making it easier for Putin to paint the West as a true aggressor. Instead, the focus should be on containing Russia's aggressive actions while supporting those within Russia who seek reform. Ultimately, the West's role should be to deter further aggression and maintain a strong defensive posture, not interfere directly in Russia's internal policies. True and lasting political change in Russia will only happen when its own citizens demand it, not when it's imposed from abroad. And that's basically the four things that we need to understand about Russia when we go into any negotiation going forward, especially when it comes to Ukraine. Now, each negotiation presents its own set of circumstances, and obviously this focused on Ukraine specifically, but nonetheless, Russia thinks we are the enemy and treats us as such, and we can never trust them because of that.